Okay, I know I'm late to this discussion, but I want to talk about Sabrina Carpenter. As a pop culture aficionado of sorts, I have been following Sabrina Carpenter's career for a hot second now, watching her transform from a Disney star to the villain in the Olivia Rodrigo beef to a bona fide main pop girly. And while for at least the last few years, her music and image have always been marked by sexual liberation and traditional femininity, the announced release of her 2025 album, Man's Best Friend, had people absolutely losing their minds, especially over the album's cover art portraying Sabrina on all fours, touching a man's thigh while he holds her hair kind of like a leash, God forbid. The reactions to the cover were very polarized, and in my opinion, were very tired and not very constructive. But while this debate surrounding Sabrina's, I guess, sexual ethics have never really been of interest to me, there has been one question that has been in the back of my mind for a second now. Why is she dressed like a stripper? And I am like 100% not asking that in a pearl clutchy kind of way. I am literally asking, why is she posted up in a cop car wearing pleasers and pole dancing in her music videos? How has this dimension of Sabrina's aesthetics and sexuality not been more widely discussed? Now, within pop culture, the use of working girl aesthetics is really nothing new or exclusive to Sabrina, especially within the last decade or so, with the popularization of pole dancing as a hobby and seeing more celebrities casually wearing pleasers at events. And while our first reaction to this might be, wow, it's incredible that these aesthetics are being more and more accepted within mainstream society, that hasn't really been the case, leading to a whole lot of stigmatization instead of acceptance and understanding for people who actually work in the sex industry. So today, we're going to take the time to see how celebrities like Sabrina Carpenter have been appropriating working girl aesthetics and how this really fits into this larger debate about feminism that's been surrounding Sabrina for the past few months. But before we get into things, hi, I'm Emma Chang-Kredl. Welcome back to my channel. It's so lovely to have you here. I just wanted to take a second to, as always, thank you so much for your support. If you're new here and you want to support my channel, you can hit the subscribe button. You can generally just leave a comment, like my video, share it with your friends, the works. Everything helps. I love making these videos. So thank you so much again. Let's get into things. While Sabrina Carpenter spent a lot of her childhood performing music, competing in singing competitions, she was really put on the map in 2013 when she booked a pretty sizable role in the Disney Channel original series Girl Meets World, which ran until early 2017. In this time, she also released 2 studio albums which didn't pick up much mainstream success. After releasing a couple more relatively unsuccessful projects, Sabrina gained a lot of notoriety in 2020 after the release of Olivia Rodrigo's contemporary classic of a pop song, Driver's License.
You're probably with that blonde girl.
Seeing the massive success of Olivia, Sabrina began to receive a lot of online hate for supposedly stealing Olivia's boyfriend, which she addressed on the 2022 album, Emails I Can't Send.
I'm a homemaker, I'm a slut. Maybe blonde was the only rhyme.
But while this period definitely garnered her attention, she really blew up when Taylor Swift asked her to open for her on a leg of her infamous Eras tour, in which Sabrina specifically became known for her rather provocative outros she would perform in each city for her song Nonsense,
And his pants is the Washington Monument,
which many parents deemed inappropriate given Swift's relatively younger audience. But regardless, Sabrina absolutely blew up last summer with the release of her hit song Espresso, followed by Please 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 and Taste, and truly became a household name. But it wasn't until the release of her album cover of the 2025 project Man's Best Friend that shit really truly hit the fan. And the debates that came out of this album cover absolutely fried me. Essentially, you had one camp of people who were claiming that this was like dangerous anti-feminist propaganda that glamorized abuse and objectification. She's talking too much about men. She's not a girl's girl. And then you had another camp of people just being like, no, you don't get it. This is feminist satire. This is really smart and empowering. But to be honest, upon seeing this album cover, the only thought I ever really had was, oh, she's being a little kinky. cool. To me, this album cover decision was far more based in marketing and personal preference, as opposed to being like some overt, explicit feminist or anti-feminist message. But anyways, the discussion that came out of this album cover really just became a beast of its own, opening up to a lot of discussions about what it means to be a feminist, what it means to be empowered. I was actually inspired to make this video after having a conversation with Lani's Lens for one of her latest videos talking about Sabrina Carpenter and the centering of men in feminist discourse, which is a really great video. I would suggest you check it out. I have the link in the description. But anyways, while I take absolutely no issue with Sabrina embracing her sexuality, she's an adult, she can do whatever she wants, it's hard to deny the aesthetics that she's used to really get this point across that she is a sexually liberated woman are just intrinsically linked to aesthetics of sex workers. And while we can and will get into the nitty-gritty of what Sabrina is doing specifically with her image and this project, in the grand scheme of things, like I said before, this is really nothing new or provocative. In fact, this isn't even the first time I've had discussions like this surrounding former child stars. In this absurdly underrated banger of a video I released recently, I discussed the ways in which many child stars like Miley Cyrus, Ariana Grande, Christina Aguilera, and Britney Spears have appropriated Black aesthetics in order to portray a more mature version of themselves. As young white women, especially former child stars, are often seen by the general public as being very girlish and innocent, while Blackness is viewed as being more overtly sexual, mature, and almost deviant. But one thing that I did not touch on this video was the fact that many of these former child stars who were using Blackness to promote this more mature image were literally doing the same thing with sex worker aesthetics. For example, you had Miley soft launching her bad girl era by using a pole in her performance A Party in the USA, which watching back is just like kind of funny because she's like barely even moving. She's kind of just like gripping the pole. But regardless, this had people losing their minds. Parents were pissed. Like it didn't even matter that she wasn't doing anything even like remotely sexual with the pole. The sheer fact that there was even a pole present, a signifier of sex work, was a powerful enough tool to send a message. Miley was not a little girl anymore. And in the work she released in the following years, she dived even deeper into this aesthetic. On a 2017 runway, Miley sported 6-inch clear plastic platform heels with custom butterfly embellishments, an exotic dancer shoe which we will dive deeper on in just a second. According to the Daily Mail, in talking about her shoes, Miley stated, quote, "They're from a stripper store. They're only $7. They can be yours for the low price of $7 and a broken ankle, but you'll have to add the stick-on jewels. That was customization." And just like sidebar, don't get it twisted, no reputable exotic dancer store will ever sell like actual dancing heels for $7. You will break your ankles. Do not buy $7 pleasers. Bad Miley. And while Sabrina's overt sexuality is not as directly linked to sex work, she's not going around being like, look at these shoes I bought from the stripper store, she is still undeniably using these aesthetics to further her image of maturity. Like, while she states that she wears these platform heels to appear taller, there's no way that no one has ever told her or that she wasn't already aware that these are very literally exotic dancer heels. The fact of the matter is, discourse surrounding former child stars who employ working girl aesthetics have always been somewhat similar to what's currently going on now with Sabrina. Like, when you think back to the discourse surrounding someone like Miley or Britney's bad girl eras, both instances had parents like all up in arms being like, this is pornography, this is not okay for the children, while others were just like absolutely eating up this new seemingly empowered era. And the thing is, when you're discussing sex worker aesthetics, even indirectly from such a black and white lens, this creates a kind of problematic secondary discussion about the sex industry itself, whether or not we're aware of it. Much like the black and white nature of the Sabrina Carpenter discourse itself, when reading comments and just generally people's takes about sex work, I often see kind of like two camps. Again, you have one camp of people being like, this is so empowering and cool and aesthetic, while others view sex work as inherently exploitative, seeing these workers as victims, seeing them as having no agency. In recent times, the sex industry has become more saturated, with more and more people entering every year. But don't get it twisted. This isn't because celebrities like Sabrina Carpenter or Miley Cyrus are using their sexuality to kind of like coerce young women into this industry, although it certainly has been glamorized over the past few years in the media. A vast majority of sex workers choose this line of work because we live in a state of capitalism that is so unsustainable, and so many jobs either just don't pay the bills or require you to work an obscene amount of hours. On the other hand, sex work often allows its workers to work less hours and make more money. And within this current state of capitalism, time and money often equal freedom. And the sheer idea of being able to circumvent certain aspects of capitalist labor can be empowering, even though it is a very difficult job that requires an immense amount of physical and emotional strength. In fact, a lot of the issues that come alongside these jobs come from the fact that this industry is so stigmatized, and full service is illegal to purchase in Canada and fully illegal in most parts of the States, leading to an increased risk of being arrested or not seeking out medical or psychological help out of fear. Workers don't get paid hourly. They don't have access to health insurance. They're often chastised for their choices. Sex work is real work. But you wouldn't know that based on the way Sabrina portrays the aesthetics of the job and its risks in her music videos. At a first glance, there's nothing too seemingly controversial about the music video for the 2024 hit Espresso. The video opens with Sabrina in a speedboat with a man before she jolts the boat, causing him to fall out. She takes his cash and goods and spends them on some luxury beach time with the girlies. It's very throwback 1950s beach day vibes, certainly not as controversial as her last video, Feather, which literally caused a massive scandal in the Catholic Church. But then the video takes a bit of a weird turn when the man who Carpenter threw out of the boat calls the cops, who arrest her, throwing her in the back of a cop car. And while this is a seemingly logical end to this narrative, one fashion choice made by Carpenter really changes the narrative. Her use of pleaser shoes, a brand of platform exotic dancing heels, turning this pretty fun beach crime romp into a pretty explicit signaling of working girl aesthetics. But if you don't happen to be aware of the history of these shoes already, this would probably not be of note to you. So let's talk about pleasers. While high platform shoes have been historically used by sex workers from 14th century China and Japan, 15th century Italy, Spain, and Turkey, and also have roots in Black, Latinx, and queer nightlife culture in the 1970s, the contemporary iteration of the stripper shoe was created in 1993 when Ben Shu founded Pleaser Shoes. These shoes were defined by very tall plastic platforms and heels and clear PVC straps, and soon became synonymous with what we would now define as working girl shoes. Since the 1990s, these shoes have found their way into the fashion world more than a few times, notably making their way into a variety of runway shows in multiple 2010s fashion weeks. In one article by The Cut discussing this fashion week trend, Amy Odell makes reference to a 2004 Chris Rock special in which he declares,
"When did clear heels become the new whore uniform? When did that happen?"
Odell then states, quote, "Well, that style of footwear was all over the spring 2010 shows in Milan and D Squared, Prada, and Fenty. If the clear shoe is indeed the shoe of the whore, it goes well with the nympho pantless looks that swept runways in New York, London, and Milan. Also, it's a natural evolution of fall's trendiest footwear, thigh-high boots, also favored by adult entertainers. Slut appeal is the new sex appeal," unquote. And as we can understand from these truly whorephobic takes, at this point in time, the pleaser shoe was still very much a taboo and was still very much linked to the sex industry. This really great comprehensive BuzzFeed News article by Mary Lodi points to the fact that during this time, celebrities like Taylor Mosman and Beyonce were called out for wearing this style of shoe, with an E! News article stating, quote, "These slutty stilettos are just not cool. Unless one of these ladies is working at the Bada Bing Club or starring as a stripper in a movie, Lucite platforms should be banned," unquote. But since then, a lot has changed. They're no longer inherently seen as exotic dancer shoes. For example, when Sabrina Carpenter wears pleaser-style Giuseppe Zanotti shoes on the Jimmy Fallon show, no one bats an eye. In fact, in many ways, it's become a staple of the singer's wardrobe. When people are discussing Sabrina's sexuality and the problems they have with it, no one is ever pointing to the shoes. But the bad girl nature of the Espresso video is not in her stealing from a man or playing in a 1960s bathing suit with her friends. No. The indicator of Sabrina's bad girl nature is when her actions are criminalized, when she's wearing a short, tight dress and wearing pleasers, when she's arrested by police, which she almost seems unbothered by. And this tongue-in-cheek final scene is so annoying to me because it's not only utilizing this element of fashion, but also this real-life risk of danger that so many sex workers face. Because while she can portray herself however she wants, wear pleasers, do her little working girl dress up, she's not going to be arrested for something like this music video.
Oh boy.
In 2019, FKA Twigs released her video for Cellophane, in which she performed a sultry pole dance performed to the tragic song, wearing pleasers and a jewel-adorned bikini. And while many were just obsessed with this video, Twigs faced a significant amount of backlash from the working girl community for, just as we've been discussing today, appropriating the aesthetics of exotic dancing. After a while of this backlash, Twigs decided to let actual dancers take over her Instagram and post more direct awareness and support for the community. And while we could just see this as a learning opportunity for Twigs and her audience, learning how to better discuss the industry and the aesthetics that are being appropriated, since this time, pole dancing outside of the industry has really just taken on a life of its own, with an increase in interest in pole dancing as a hobby. We're seeing a rise in pole dancing studio classes, pole dancing social media accounts, and even pole dancing competitions. We're also seeing a rise in celebrities such as Lisa and of course Sabrina Carpenter incorporating pole dancing into their performances and or workout routines. But even more so than the use of pleasers as a fashion statement, the trend of pole dancing as a hobby has caused just like so much anger and controversy. In an article from Spin-Off magazine, Gabi Lardes explains that while some pole hobbyists do pole dancing in a somewhat ethical and sex worker positive way, doing their best to make actual working girls feel safe and heard, there are just an abundance of pole hobbyists who are just adamant about the fact that they are not strippers, with Lardes explaining that some go as far as to claim that the pole dancing they're engaging with was actually, quote, developed from Chinese pole, a completely separate traditional circus art and athletic discipline, unquote. Just further perpetuating this idea that stripping is degrading, and again, just adding to this stigma. Hashtag not a stripper. Sorry. Lardes also covers the upsurge in pole fitness competitions, in which hobbyists perform in front of audiences and judges, sometimes dressing up in exotic dancer apparel, and occasionally very literally stripping. In response to these competitions, Lardes interviews dancer Bambi, who states, "It's like you're taking something that essentially a minority is doing for money and is looked down upon, and you're doing it for free, and people are praising you for it," unquote. In essence, pole dancing outside of the industry has become viewed as either a fitness activity to be proud of, or a form of escapism, to really get in touch with one's sensuality without all the stigma and actual working in the industry. And to me, this is very much in line with a lot of discourse I've seen surrounding Sabrina's use of pole dancing in her recently released video for the song Tears, which sees Sabrina, according to this rather evil bored panda think piece, strip down to pole dance and crawl on all fours. Like, people are just so not shy to out themselves as whorephobic, and it's concerning. Like I said before, there are just so many tweets out there about Sabrina acting like a stripper based on this pole dancing performance, which again clearly just holds some form of judgment, whether good or bad, such as this one that reads, "I like Sabrina Carpenter, but it's a bit much sometimes. I don't see how it's any different from being a stripper." Or this thread, in which through defending Sabrina, telling another user not to slut shame her, for explaining that Sabrina is no different from a sex worker, Ginger writes, "That's actually so far from the truth. She's performing," creating a clear moral distinction between sex work and the performance of sex work aesthetics. But either way, in this discussion, the working girl is not seen as a person. They're more of a concept, full sexual liberation or full victim. When these aesthetics are borrowed by non-sex workers, this fantasy of liberation can be boiled down to a performance, which people like Sabrina can liberally move in and out of. So let's talk a little bit more about this Tears video. One thing of note about Sabrina's aesthetic is the fact that, while yes, she draws some working girl aesthetics, she also draws a lot of inspiration from 1960s fashion. And this, in line with her more sexually liberated image, to me kind of just gives like second wave feminism in a nutshell. Like, take the Tears video, for example, which follows a 1960s housewife looking Sabrina coming upon a house of sexually transgressive people in which she herself becomes sexually liberated. This video draws clear inspiration inspiration from the 1975 cult classic, The Rocky Horror Picture Show, which follows a very conservative-looking straight couple, Brad and Janet, as they find themselves stranded in a house full of sexually transgressive, gender-bending individuals, in which time they both find their own sexual liberation through a series of occasionally non-consensual encounters. The Rocky Horror Picture Show has been celebrated for being a rather transgressive film for the time it came out, and is still heralded today as a campy cult classic. So it makes perfect sense to me why Sabrina, whose whole shtick is blending more glamorous yet conservative 1960s aesthetics with sexual liberation. But it's not Coleman Domingo in drag or the other clear references to the film that have people up in arms. It's Sabrina stripping and dancing on a pole, which has people absolutely scandalized. The very nature of the scene of Sabrina dancing on the pole to me really exists as a turning point in the narrative of this video, a point in which Sabrina is able to fully embrace her newfound sexual liberation, which really fits into one of the understandings we discussed about sex work as a fantasy of liberation. Much like the end of Rocky Horror, Sabrina leaves the mansion and is in a sense back in the real world, even leaving in the clothes she arrived in. In this sense, she leaves with the liberation she learned from the house, but is clearly not part of the culture, which just really perfectly fits into the greater understanding of the ways in which working girl culture is utilized by celebrities like Sabrina. And through this thought process, I began to think more and more about the ways that Sabrina's aesthetic decisions in music videos like this decision to stay in the 1960s, really does align with like this second wave feminist revival that's been just like plaguing the Sabrina discourse of late. Second wave feminism, which occurred between the 1960s and 1980s, was very much based in middle-class white woman issues, which can be seen through the immense success of Betty Friedan's The Feminist Mystique. The feminine mystique posited that women at this time were facing the problem with no name, which was essentially a dissatisfaction with being a housewife, wanting more for themselves. And through this movement, a lot of ground was covered, and a lot of things changed. Women were granted access to birth control. Roe v. Wade was implemented. Women were able to raise awareness about domestic abuse, apply for mortgages. And alongside these greater achievements, we also saw a lot of polarization when it came to women's sexuality. Much like the Sabrina Carpenter debate, you had the radical feminists who viewed sex work and more generally, I guess, sexuality under patriarchy as inherently oppressive, while sex-positive feminists viewed sexuality as something that could be reclaimed and could be empowering. In Jordan Theresa's subscriber-exclusive podcast, Sydney Sweeney, Sabrina Carpenter, and the Evolution of Contemporary Sex Work, Jordan discusses one particular radical second-wave feminist who has been making waves in Gen Z feminist discourse spaces in recent times, Andrea Dworkin, a former sex worker known for her rather swerfy or sex worker exclusionary radical feminist views. Essentially, through a combination of her life experiences and theoretical conclusions, Dworkin concluded that woman could only exist through a patriarchal binary, the housewife or the sex worker, both of which were sexist and exploitative. She wrote that women who choose to be housewives do so as an alternative to sex work, explaining, quote, "Some women want to work, not sex labor, real work that men, those real humans, do for a living wage. They want an honest wage for honest work," unquote. And like, even within the context in which this was written during the second wave feminist movement, we can see some flaws here. Notably, this idea that sex work is not real work, and that sex workers inherently have no agency and are victims, as they are pretty much just sexualizing themselves for the pleasure of men. And these ideas come from her book Right Wing Women, which Jordan Theresa uses as a pretty notable point of discussion. Here, Theresa states, quote, "Obviously, sex work is a huge umbrella term, and I don't want to imply that Sydney Sweeney being paid, hundreds of thousands of dollars, potentially millions for these campaigns, as comparable to someone doing full service work on the street, or someone doing OnlyFans, or someone being a stripper. I don't want to imply that, but I think it would be interesting to consider Sydney Sweeney's sexualized campaigns as sex work because it does reiterate and support Andrea Dworkin's theories that some of the only ways that women can make money is through sex work," unquote. And while Jordan definitely does take a second to, explain that what Sydney Sweeney and someone like Sabrina Carpenter are doing as being inherently different as actual sex work, I would argue that this is still kind of like an iffy angle to take. While discussing the ways in which non-sex workers sexualize themselves for profit is an interesting and important point of discussion, Sabrina Carpenter and Sydney Sweeney just aren't sex workers. If anything, they are profiting off the backs of actual workers. And I know that a big reason why we're kind of moving back into second wave feminist discourse is because of things like Roe v. Wade being overturned, which is horrible. And this is something that we should definitely be talking about. But at the end of the day, we're not in the 1950s or 1960s right now. We're in 2025. And while yes, things like Roe v. Wade being overturned have sent us way back, that doesn't mean that we haven't progressed a lot from this time period, and discourse has very much changed since this time. For example, while there are still biases present, if you're a cis woman, especially a white cis woman, you have so many job opportunities out there that are not sex work. Like, we have women billionaires, women CEOs who are not sexualizing themselves for income. Therefore, I find this kind of like Dworkinian reading of this conversation to in turn be a bit dated. Like, yes, Sabrina is profiting off her sexuality, and her sexuality definitely played a huge role in her success and the attention she's getting from the media, but the profit she's gaining is very much based in the aesthetics and the ideas of what sex work is, not sexual labor itself. And while Jordan Theresa does argue that we should be moving away from conversations like, is this representation empowering or degrading, and including voices of real sex workers, I think that creating this like monolithic understanding of sexualization and sex work doesn't really make much sense. Yes, we can discuss sexualization and patriarchy at a large scale and what it means to dismantle these systems. But we also have to recognize that there are still power and differences between women. And when we're appropriating a stigmatized person's literal job to stigmatize ourselves, I don't find this to be particularly ethical or anywhere near the same thing. So all to say, I think that it's kind of dangerous to view Sabrina or Sydney Sweeney's work as being sex work, because this just makes them a part of a conversation that honestly doesn't include them. Further, this whole discussion is just based in a feminist who was inherently anti-sex work, so that's not very supportive now, is it?
Oh boy.
While Sabrina is far from the only celebrity that has appropriated working girl aesthetics, and I'm sure she won't be the last, I feel as though just like the intensity of the conversation surrounding her sexuality and their embedded whorephobia make this such an important case study for the ways in which we're societally viewing sex industry workers. My 2 cents is that if people are choosing to use these aesthetics, which I think they shouldn't, the least they can do is speak up about their history and actually open up some discussions. While I don't think it's Sabrina's job to be like a feminist icon for her viewers, and she doesn't owe anyone an explanation for portraying herself in a traditionally femme or sexualized way, it's just important to understand who you're standing on and potentially silencing in order to be heard. Because sex work is not just a concept, an aesthetic. It's a real job. And the effects of things like stigmatization and criminalization are also very real. So put some respect on the culture you're profiting off of, please. If you want to learn more about sex worker experiences or you want resources for sex workers, I've linked some texts and some websites in the description that I would love for you to check out if that's of interest to you. That's going to be all for me today. Thank you so much for watching to the end of this video. If you have any recommendations, websites, texts, films, anything for me, please leave a comment, hit me up on Instagram. Follow me on Instagram while you're at it. That's where I post updates about my channel. You're the best. I love you. See you in the next one.